Good afternoon, it's your brother in Christ, Richard. Happy Sabbath. How you guys doing? I hope you guys having a blessed Sabbath. And basically, the topic of today, I am going to call it the contemporary and a traditional way of worship. And that's a question of my sermon, which is the best to follow? Well, that's the decision that you and I have to make, which one we want to follow. Also, I always say it's always good to know where things come from, to know what is the background of a belief or something that we want to do. If I want to bring something to a church, I need to know first if that's something that's good for the church. So this is today, the Sabbath, we are going to find out to see what is really going on and what God really looking for. So we have to first find a definition. What is contemporary? It's a marked by characteristic of the present period, modern or current, happening, existing, living, or coming into being, doing the same period of time. So it's something that we do right now, something that we use at the present time. While we don't change, we don't continue doing the same thing from the past. We use modern things. For example, like we find furniture that are more modern. We find structured buildings. We see how now they're more modern, more contemporary. Also, you find in the workplace now, a lot of companies are using what is called the open space, the open concept, which means it's open area, and they got new furniture, modern furniture, like table glass, and modern chairs. That is basically to encourage employees to have more interaction with each other. And it's something just kind of more staying away from the cubicles. So what is tradition? Tradition is handing down from age to age. Something that it passed to you from your parents and your grandparents. Following or conforming to traditions, adhering to the past practices or established conventions. So, we find that in the past, we had the old phones. I remember the phone when I was growing up. We had a dial like that. The typewriter. That was something that was used back in the days. We also have the traditions from clothes of different cultures. Also, we have a way of doing things. For example, you have people working the farms. Now we have machines. So contemporary has a lot of advantage that it makes our life a lot easier. We got the iPhones, we got computers, we have tablets, those things that are brand new things that are from the future technology that we could use, that it makes our life a lot easier than things that were from the past. It was difficult because we didn't have technology. I mean, imagine now I could send an email. Back then, you have to write a letter. Now I could use Skype and WhatsApp to communicate with my loved ones. You got Facebook. Back then, we didn't got those things. So we've seen how contemporary ideas are good because it makes our life more comfortable. Now, tradition, for example, for myself, as growing as Adventist, usually the service started at 9:15 a.m. And that was a tradition that for Adventist Church. The Sabbath school program started at 9:15 a.m. Communion, which is not a tradition, is more as a principle. It's more something that's in the Bible, but it has some traditions on how we perform. Deacons that perform in the communion wear black suits. Women wear white dresses and white gloves. That's kind of a tradition that is used in the Adventist church. That's a more the conservative, I guess, or traditional side. I am more in some area, I am contemporary myself. For example, I don't like to read when I preach. I don't like to read my sermons. I think it's kind of boring. I think you lose interest from the audience. I like to use PowerPoints. I will add videos, I will add images to make my sermon more interesting and more engaging with the audience. So that's something that I like to do. To me, it's something that I love to do because it made more sense to me to do that. So we have to do some history on exactly what is contemporary. We're gonna do the history on that philosophy. And we got to go back to the 1950s, the era of rock and roll music. And I'm going to introduce, and we see in the slide, you see Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, and Billy Haley. These people were founders of rock and roll. They changed the decade with the music. Now, during that time, rock and roll music was not accepted in many homes because it was considered a music that encouraged sin, and it opened the desire for sexual desires. So many people said, "Now we are going to reject that. We're gonna reject that kind of music, so we don't like it in our homes." A decade later, in the 1960s, that was the New Age era. That's the era of the hippies. You know, free sex, alcohol. You do whatever you want. Also, that was the time where the Beatles became very popular, Rolling Stones, rock and roll band became so popular in the 1960s. But during that time, there was a movement that started that it was called the Jesus Movement. And this movement was based, brother, on different organizations, people who wanted to reach out to the hippies. They wanted to bring the gospel to them. So from that group, from that movement, something came out of it, and it was called the Jesus music. And when this music came out, it basically was, it says, it was a music engineer developed in parallel, to Jesus movement. It outlasted the movement that the spawn in the Christianity began to eclipse to assert its musician around. So this music was attracting different musicians, different artists that were attracted. So that's what they wanted to do. So we have to now go read a little more what is music really consists of. And it said large numbers of hippie and street musicians began converting to born-again Christianity. So a lot of these hippies was being converted during the 1960s. A number of these conversions, especially in Southern California, was due to the outreach of Lonnie Furby and Pastor Chuck Smith of Calvary Chapel. So these pastors will go out on the beach, they will go out in California, and they will go and preach on public. They will go out open areas, and they will reach out to the hippies. Now it says here, in the aftermath of such conversions, these musicians continue playing the same style of music that they have been playing prior to the conversion. So they're all playing the same type of music that they played before they were converted. So they now infuse their lyrics with Christian message. So they took the same sound of music and they add this sound, the same music they were playing, but they added Christian lyrics. That's basically what his music was all about. So it was basically more involved. And you could say different names we see here for rock people who are banned. And it said the music tended to be relatively simple. It drew largely on guitar, bass, folk, and folk rock influences. The message is also seen to be relatively simple as songwriters tempted to the phrase to the value of Christ-centered spiritual experiences without invoking the vocabulary or the other trappings of ecclesiastical religion. Rather than quoting clinches of King James Bible verses, they use storytelling, allegory, imagery, and complex metaphors. So what they did was, instead of using, a quote from the Bible, they started using like stories and complicated, complex metaphors. That's what they were doing. Now, it kind of was insulting so many Christians because they were saying, wait a minute, you still playing your music, but you adding, Jesus and some words into it to make it sound like a Christian song. Now, in addition to the basic message of salvation, the lyrics often reflect expectations of the imminent second coming of Christ, prominent to the evangelical circles at the time, reflected the highly population of the late great planet Earth. So they were using some of the vocabulary from this book. And in this book, basically talk about the end time events, like the rapture, the millennium, and staying behind. So a lot of the songs came out from this book that was sold in during this time in the 1960s, 70s. They were using some of the vocabulary from that book. And he also said, despite the message, the music was described by many as worldly at best, or the devil's music in the worst case. So many Christians and conservatives at that time felt that the music that this movement was introducing was a music that was the devil's music. It was a bad music because they're saying you are adding Christian lyrics, but the sound is still the same. So it was confusion. This later position was held by conservatives such as Bill Gothard, as taught in his basic youth conflict seminars. So many pastors that conservatives spoke against this movement because they're saying, it is confusing to the youth that they're introducing this nice music, but it has Christian lyric, but the sound, it doesn't sound right. Now, this is I'm basically talking about this because we've seen this a lot in the church now. People are gonna tell you, "Oh, I'm not traditional, I'm conservative." That's how they speak. That's how they talk. They will tell you, "Hey, I'm traditional, whatever. I'm not contemporary." Or they will tell you, "Oh, I'm contemporary. We don't do things here traditional. We're different." Now, when we go back and read more about this music, Larry Norman, who was one of the founders of this movement, who became very prominent on the Jesus music, he said he often remembered as the father of Christian rock because of his early contribution before the Jesus movement. So he was always giving a lot of contribution to this movement. Is developing new gear of mixed rock rhythm and the Christian message. So this style was not initially well received by many Christians community at that time. And the question says, how come the Christian at that time did not accept this type of music or this type of worship? Why didn't accept it? Now, the question is, why are we accepting it now? What changed? Well, he said he remembered, and he has a song that says, "Why should the devil have all the good music?" This is what one of his title for one of his songs. He said, "Why the devil should have all the good music?" He remembered as artist the first combined rock and roll with the Christian lyrics in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. So he was considered in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame as the first rock artist, Christian rock artist. Now, why I'm saying this, because if you see all this article that I'm basically showing on screen, you could see that this comes from the world. It comes from an era of drugs, free sex, and alcohol. This is where it came from. It came from the world. And the question is, why is this in the church? Now, let me show you, so people don't think that I'm being judgmental. I'm gonna show you some of the sounds, some of the music that came out from that period and now, and how this is a movement influence the world. Let me show you a lot of some of this music about. You see what this is? This is some of the music that came out that were influenced by this movement. Now, it's a lot of them I've heard on the radio, and I heard a lot of them play in some of our churches. Now, I'm going to show you another video clip of the earlier music from the 1960s and 70s, and we're going to see this other sound. Watching for the bridegroom, I've left it all night. 12 bridesmaids held their lamps to shed a welcome light. Got to shout about it, can't stop singing about my God, so real. Sing that sweet, sweet song of salvation, and let your laughter fill the air. 1970. And the presence of the Lord. Open your eyes, can't you see that the world isn't right? Amazing grace. I'm gonna take a trip. That good old coffee cup. I take that you can sit down. Now, brother and sister, you heard the same sound that was played from a lot of this rock band from the world, like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin. Like we seen some of the bands and the sound. So when we start hearing some of the Christian rock and roll artists, we have the same sound. Why? Why do we have the same sound if we're a Christian? And why do we playing into this time? We are influenced by this movement still, and we bring this type of music into the house of the Lord. Now, many will say, but Richard, you know, it's nothing wrong. It's Christian music. You know, hey, they're speaking about Christ. Yes, but you know what? Where does it came from? That's the question. Is that did it came from the Bible? Did God say, hey, you know, you guys, it's okay, we could play the song? Now, many will say, oh, but the Bible's not as specific. It doesn't say exactly what kind of music I could play. Well, but it came from the world. So why are we playing it in the house of the Lord? Now, imagine I come to your house and you got your house decorated the way you want to. And I come in and I start changing things. Or I bring some type of like a image, or I put an altar of a God or something in your house. You will feel violated. You'll be upset. You will say, this is wrong. Why are you disrespecting my house? How do you think Christ feel when we bring this type of music into his house? This worship. And then we call it, we're contemporary. Now I show you where that came from. That came from that movement. It's just a movement. And in the 1970s, they changed to the contemporary Christian music. CCM, that's what it's called now. So it's not something that came from God. So it didn't came from God. Who did it came from? Now we have to go a little deeper. We have to go deeper now. And I want to go to the 1930s, another era, because from there it's called the Golden Age. Well, a lot of the movie stars, singers came out. They marked their career during this time. You know, also know the time of the Depression. It was a difficult time. But during this time, a sound started emerging. A sound began. And it was called by this man named Robert Johnson, who was a young jazz and blues player. Now, this information, you could find it on Google. You could find the information on any website. You go out and find it. You can find this man because this man was he was one of the founders of jazz music. Very popular. And the story goes that he was not a very good player with the guitar. He wanted to play the guitar of all the jazz players, and they would tell him, no, brother, you cannot play. So one day he goes out and he leaves, and he meets this man called Ike Zimmerman, who was also a jazz player, who would play, the story goes that he played in the cemetery to wake up the spirits. That's what he would do. So he hanging out for 6 months with this man, and then one night he goes before midnight in Mississippi, and he goes to the crossroad. And the story says that he saw himself, so the devil came when he was playing the guitar, and the devil took his guitar from him and played the guitar and gave it back to Robert Johnson and said, look, this is a deal. And he made a deal with the devil. Now, when his friends were hearing his songs, when he came back from this trip that he took, he went back to the joints, to the bars, and instead people said that his way of playing was like a supernatural. I mean, his songs were amazing. And this is what they said, wait a minute, he sold to the devil, because he writes a song called Crossroad where he says that. Now, you must say, why talk about this? Well, we got to talk about this man because he influenced another jazz player, came by the name Thomas Dorsey. Now, Thomas Dorsey is also known as the father of gospel. And I got to tell you why he got that name. Well, in the late 1920s, he made a lot of songs, jazz and blues songs that made him famous. He made good money. But one day he just got a vision, and he decided to take jazz music melody and rhythm, and he got this idea. He said, well, I'm gonna introduce this to the Christian gospel, to the music, to the gospel. This is what I'm gonna do. And he used Christian lyrics with jazz, melody, and rhythm. And this combination became known as the Dorsey sound. This is what he came to know. And he became famous. Now, during this time, when he started doing this, a lot of church rejected him. They said, no, brother, we don't like your song because your song is from the world. You got jazz music and blues there. We don't want to take your songs. And he struggled for a while because the churches did not accept his music. Now, I'm going to show you a video from this man who talks about Thomas Dorsey. And listen what he says about what Thomas Dorsey do, what he did.
Affectionately refer to him as the godfather of gospel because he sophisticated the call and response technique which came by the oral tradition from West Africa. And he introduced the so-called jazz cadences and rhythms of popular music into the gospel idiom. What he did when he created the form we know as gospel, he put the music of faith into the common idiom of the people.
Now, in the video, if you didn't hear that well, this priest said that Thomas Dorsey was influenced by the music of the Western Africa. And he used that, and he went to, we find that he went to Congo. And in Congo, he copied the style of music and he introduced it to Louisiana. So he used the style of music from the Congo that a lot of times were used to summon the spirit. He used that influence to introduce this new sound, this new gospel into the churches. So if this man go out and find this type of music that is not approved by God, and he adds and put a different sound, that's not the sound that God wanted his church. God does not want that kind of music because it is a worship of him. He doesn't want strange things in his church. And we don't have no business promoting this type of worship in the house of the Lord. This is what I'm saying. And I'll say it again. We should not be saying, oh, I'm contemporary, if you don't know where it comes from. Just because I like it. I like the sound of it. Just because it's new and everybody's doing it doesn't mean that it's right. So we need to know, I'm not sure what the meaning of jazz music is, because jazz and blues is where the rock and roll music come from. It's a type of melody of the jazz and the blues. But I'm going to show you right now on this slide what does it really mean. It is a now music of African American origin, characterized by syncopated rhythm, also in group improvisation, and variety of harmonic items, and instrumental techniques. It exists in a number of styles compared like blues. So jazz is a type of blues. It's a derivative of the blues. It's a verb to play dance to jazz music. African American slang, absolutely. This is what it means with the meaning of jazz and slang. Have sexual intercourse with a person. Now, back in the days, when people played jazz music in the joints, in the bar, it made them sell more. It made them buy more alcohol. It opened the desires of people to be together. This is what jazz music did back then. What do you think it's gonna do now? If that is the meaning and it comes from the world, why would we put that music in the church? Why would we think this is okay? If the world is saying what is music all about, why as a Christian, I'm just bringing the music to the house of the Lord? And this is what Tom Mercy says. The message is not the music, but the words of the songs. They describe his music. It matters not what kind of movement it has. If the words are Jesus, heaven, faith, and life, then you have a song which God is pleased. That's his opinion. Because he's saying it don't matter what type of beat it had. It doesn't matter if it makes you move. It doesn't matter if wake up your desires. But if you have Christ in it and it has faith, then God is pleased. God is not pleased when we mix holy things with paganism. He does not like when we mix the world worship that he wants and we add things from the world. God does not like that. It's an offense to him. Now, we have to find definition of original rock and roll. Ronnie Hill, a former music specialist, explains how this pagan dance used fertility rituals and to make contact with demons travel west. This is what they would use rock and roll music. Brought to America, continued with slaves and incubated in the Buddhism of the Caribbean region. The resulting mixture made a landfall at New Orleans in the 1st century. So they're saying this type of sound came from the western part of Africa into this America, and it was introduced by this artist to the world. And it was used in those countries to summon the spirits, the demons. This is why God said, don't bring it to my house. Because it does not come from me. And it's the way he said the meaning of rock and roll. The term is blue euphemism for sexual intercourse. Rolling Stone's Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll says, rock is 99% sex. That's what John 8 says. Rock is sex. The beat matches the body rhythm. These are artists saying this. Rock and roll in general term with sexual implication as rocking and rolling. Original meant fornication. Brothers and sisters, this is not my words. These are people who are in this business, who are saying the meaning of this music. So why would you have this praise music in your church? And you said that, and remember, Thomas Rossi said, God will please. That's his opinion. So the question is, so why would I bring this kind of worship into the house of the Lord? Now, many will say, well, because, we're new. I want something different. The traditional things are boring. And that's okay. It's okay to innovate. It's okay to try good things. Hey, a better way to preach. Not, hey, look, like we're doing now. People are preaching from their homes. They're preaching with Zoom. They're reaching out more people. You could innovate some things, but it's not okay when we try to change God's principles because some people like it or because it's a new thing. Like I said before, just because everybody is doing it and is new, that does not mean that God is pleased, that God will accept it. Now, if you go back to Genesis 4, you find the story of Cain and Abel. Both came from the same education, had the same parents. They knew the system of sacrifice. But Abel chose to follow Christ, chose to obey. Cain didn't. Cain wanted to do what he wanted. I want to do what I think is best. And God rejected his sacrifice. And many of us, God's rejecting our worship. But it's not what he's asking for. We're giving what we think Christ wants. The world is telling you this is a worship that you need to attract the people. Remember, that's what the Jesus movement did. They came out with this music to what made the hippie interested. That's the way we're going to bring it to God, by using the same music that they have. Many times we're trying to do the same thing. We want to use the tools of the world to attract them. And what happened is they're saying, oh, they recognize it, and they're going back because saying, I'm getting the same worship in the world that I got in your church. Doesn't make any sense. Now, 1 John 2:15 says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loved the world, the love the Father is not in him. Very clear. This type of stuff is from the world. And we should not be part of that. We should have no part of those things because it comes from the world. It doesn't come from God. Now, the Bible tells us on how we can worship God and how we can sing and praise. In Ephesians 5:19 says, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and psalms from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your heart to the Lord with the right spirit, brothers and sisters. Not with the spirit of the world. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and in spiritual songs, singing the grace in your hearts to the Lord. The Bible is very clear. Singing songs, brothers and sisters, of hymns, psalm of grace that is in our hearts. That's the worship Christ wants. Christ does not want the worship that comes from the world. The world does not follow Christ, man. So we need to follow Christ. And this is the purpose of music of praise. Let's see what the Bible, this is what Andrew White says. The music was made to serve the holy purpose. Live the thoughts that which is pure, noble and elevating and waking the soul, devotion and gratitude to God. So God created music so it could elevate our thoughts to what is pure. Not to make me feel good or to make body movements. That's not what it was meant for. It was to praise God. Music formed part of God's worship in courts above. And it should endeavor in our songs of praise. She says, to approach as near as possible to the harmony of the heavenly choir. So our worship, brothers and sisters, our praise must be almost close to the worship of heaven, of the choirs of heaven, not the choir of the world, not the sound of the world. How can we bring this sound to the house of the Lord and say, oh, God, you accept it? No, brothers and sisters, that's not the way God wants us to do things. It doesn't work like that. And let me say this, because a lot of times we talk so much about love, about Christ's love, but we apply it to our spouse, we apply it to our friends, we apply it to our loved ones in marriage, we apply it to church members. But how come we don't apply that type of love to Christ? How come we don't love Christ the same as we should? Because the Bible says in the book of John, the Bible asks and says that if you love me, you will keep my commandment. If you obey me, if you love me, you obey me. So as leaders of the church, we have to love God above all things. And we have to protect the church from the invasion of the enemy. We have leaders, we have to, sometimes we have to make hard decisions for putting God first above members that want to bring some strange fire to a church. As leaders, we have to respect the house of the Lord. We cannot allow things to happen in our churches. We have to love God in the same magnitude, the same level as we want God to love us, because we always talk about God's love. But it always seems that when we speak about God's love, it's one way. How do we show that we love God? By obeying him, by doing his will. So when we speak that we're contemporary, this is where we're saying we're from. I'm not contemporary. I don't call myself traditional. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. That is where I stand. I don't call myself contemporary. Oh, I'm traditional. Okay, yeah, that just titles and positions. But what I'm saying is what really matters is how we worship God. Let me tell you a final story. When God was speaking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, she told Christ, our ancestors, our father told us that we should come to this place to worship. And we should be here. And why God said, look, there will be a time that none of this will matter. That what matters is that you worship Christ with the right spirit. That's what God the Father is looking for. That we worship God in the right spirit, in the right mind, with wisdom, not with influence of the world. See, we cannot give the world what they have. It's impossible. And if you ask yourself why the churches are the way they are, and why many of the youth I'm not there, it's because they're finding out, brothers and sisters, and I'll be honest, that they're receiving the same type of entertainment in the church than in the world. So what they're saying is, I throw my towel when I go to the world, because it doesn't work. What works is Christ. What makes sense is doing the will of God. Brothers and sisters, if you like this video, share with your brothers, with your family, loved ones, and members. Give me a thumbs up. Until next time, this is your brother Christ Richard. Happy Sabbath.